So, did you enjoy the myth about Demeter and Persephone? And were you able to catch any similarities or differences between the one that I read to you and the one that you read yourself? Well, let's review quickly in the OneNote what the answers were. First of all, it was both a creation myth and a morality myth, and that happens sometimes, and it did in this case. It was almost like there were two stories in one story, but it was a creation myth because it shows how and why we have echoes. And it was also a morality myth because it shows you what can happen if you're too vain. Now, vain means just too full of yourself, too much pride, that you're overly proud of either the way you look or the way you act. So, in this case, there was too much vanity. Next, it asks you, what was the theme? Now, of course, the theme should be what lesson was learned while you were reading Demeter and Persephone. There actually could be more than one theme with this as well, so you only needed to put one answer, but there is more than one correct answer. And don't forget that the theme means it's what the reader learns. As the reader, me or you, what is it that you can take with you in your life and apply in your life so that it makes your life better? It's not what the character learned, okay? So in this case, maybe the character did learn something, but when you state a theme, it has to be without the character's name in it. It has to be something that you or the reader can take with you in your life and learn from. So in this case, one of the themes was that you should not trick others. I think that that's exactly what Echo was doing, and we learned from her mistake that if you trick others, you can be punished. Also, another theme would be being too vain can cause you trouble. And that's what happened with Narcissus. He was so in love with himself that it caused him trouble in the end. I mean, he was turned into a flower. But he was just consumed. His life was consumed by spending too much time on himself. So I think that's something that we can all learn, is that vanity may cause us to lose sight or not pay attention to other things because we're just paying attention to ourselves. And then you have the vocabulary. Well, there were a couple vocabulary words. One is the word echo. This myth actually is where we get our word echo from. Another word that was a vocabulary word that comes from this story is the word narcissus. And narcissus is a flower, also known as a daffodil, but there are other words too, like narcissistic and narcissism. And it explained in there what that was as well. So now I'm going to read you a bonus myth. This one is not required, but it's always one that the students love. So I'm going to read this to you. And while I'm reading to you The Golden Touch, which is the story of King Midas, I would like you to think about, is it a creation myth or morality myth? And what is the theme? King Midas was a greedy man. In fact, he was one of the greediest people who ever lived. All day long, he thought about how much gold he had. All night, he dreamt about how he could get even more. You can see him there admiring the gold. Midas once did a favor for a god, and in return, he was granted one wish, anything he wanted. Midas thought long and hard. How could one wish satisfy his countless desires? He thought he deserved at least 3. After all, weren't 3 wishes the standard reward? He felt cheated until an idea struck him like a flash. I know how I can get it all, he says. My wish is that everything I touch will turn to gold. Midas could not resist testing his new power immediately. He reached out and broke off a twig from a tree. To his delight, the twig became solid gold. He began grabbing everything in sight, dirt, leaves, grass, flowers, and everything he touched hardened into pure gold. I'll be the wealthiest, most powerful king in the world. I'm going to spend every minute of the day turning things to gold. I won't even stop to sleep. The greedy king worked up quite an appetite, rushing about, tagging everything in sight. And after many hours, he returned to the castle to order a royal feast. As he sat down, the table and chair turned to gold at his touch. He noticed with glee that the cup became a golden goblet in his hand. Midas took a sip of water to quench his terrible thirst and suddenly choked on a glob of metal. Spitting it out, he realized the water had turned to gold. Sounds like Midas has a problem on his hands. Midas picked up a piece of bread and shoved it into his mouth as quickly as he could, but he could not outsmart his golden touch. As soon as the bread touched his lips, it turned into a chunk of gold. What is the use of having more gold than Apollo if I can't even eat a piece of bread, he says. I'll be the richest but hungriest king in history. He stormed out of the banquet hall, and Midas bumped into one of his servants. He turned to yell at the servant for getting in his way, but instead he came face to face with a life-size golden statue. Wow. So here he bumped into his servant, and his servant turned into a golden statue. Sobbing, Midas collapsed to the floor and begged the gods for mercy. His tears fell like tiny golden marbles, which only made him cry harder. I've learned my lesson. I was too greedy and I'm punished for it. Now I know that riches cannot buy happiness. Please take away all this gold and let things return to the way they were. The gods took pity on this pathetic king and took away the Midas touch, which was, after all, a curse rather than a gift. Just in case Midas forgot his own foolishness, the gods gave him a reminder. 2 donkey ears sprouted from the top of his head so that Midas would never forget his lesson. You can see those donkey ears right there. So, is this a creation myth or is it a morality myth? I think it's a morality myth. And the theme here is don't be too greedy, right? His greed just overtook him. I also would like to think of the theme in a different way, like the transverse or the opposite. And the opposite would be appreciate what you have. So go ahead and think about this myth for today. And you are going to review Demeter and Persephone that I just went over with you. And then you're going to answer the content framing question. And you're going to pick one myth that we've talked about throughout this module, and you might need to go back into lessons. You can even use the golden touch if you want, but it's up to you which one you use. And you need to tell me the title of the one that you think revealed the most beliefs of the ancient Greeks, and then you need to tell me why do you think so? Why did you choose that myth? And you'll want to explain the theme of the myth that you've chosen, and then elaborate or say more about that myth and what it taught the Greeks. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Have a great day, everybody.